Society tells you a very specific lie about your intelligence. They act like if your own life is messy, if your relationships are unstable, if your habits are self-destructive, then you have no right to give advice to anybody else. They make it sound like wisdom only belongs to people with perfect lives, but psychology says something much darker. Some of the best advice in the world comes from people who are quietly falling apart in their own lives. If you are the person everyone calls in a crisis, if you can solve your friends' problems in 5 minutes, but somehow keep repeating the same painful mistakes yourself, stay until the end, because what you are living with is not hypocrisy. It is a psychological paradox. And once you understand it, you may finally stop calling yourself broken. Think about the last time someone called you for advice. They were spiraling, a toxic relationship, a family problem, a career decision, some emotional mess they could not untangle on their own. And the second they started talking, something inside you changed. The noise in your own head got quiet. You became calm, precise, almost surgical. You saw the problem instantly. The red flags, the patterns, the self-sabotage, the exact sentence they needed to hear. You told them the truth they were avoiding. You told them what boundaries to set, what to stop tolerating, and what to walk away from. And they probably looked at you like you were some kind of genius, like you had life completely figured out. Then you hung up the phone, and a few minutes later, you looked at your own life and realized you were doing the exact opposite. That is the strangest part of your mind. You can see everything clearly, except when the mirror is pointed at you. Psychologists call this Solomon's paradox. It is the tendency to reason much more wisely about other people's problems than your own, and it happens for a reason. When you look at someone else's situation, your brain has distance. Their pain is not attached to your identity. Their rejection is not your rejection. Their failure is not your failure. So your mind can step back, strip away the emotion, and actually think. That is when your prefrontal cortex takes over. The part of your brain responsible for logic, perspective, and judgment finally gets room to work. You see the chessboard. You see the pieces. You see the whole game. But when it is your life, the board disappears. You are no longer watching the game. You are inside it, and that changes everything. Your own fear gets louder. Your own history gets louder. Your own shame gets louder. Your own hope gets louder too. And sometimes hope is what keeps you stuck the longest, because when it is your heartbreak, your loneliness, your bad relationship, your brain does not just analyze, it defends, it excuses, it delays. It protects what it already knows is hurting you. That is why you can give somebody else perfect advice and still make the wrong choice for yourself. It is not because you are stupid. It is because your emotions are standing in the way of your clarity. But there is another layer. For a lot of people, giving advice is not just kindness. It is identity. It is the role you learned to survive in. You became the calm one, the understanding one, the fixer, the person who always knows what to say. And over time, being needed started to feel dangerously close to being loved. So every time someone comes to you with a problem, a part of you feels useful, powerful, safe. And that is where the darkness begins, because helping other people can become a way to avoid your own life. If you are busy solving everyone else's pain, you do not have to sit in the silence of your own. You do not have to face the choices you have been avoiding. You do not have to ask why your own standards are lower than the advice you give away for free. That is the hidden trap. You are not only giving advice, you are using advice as a shield, a way to look wise and put together, while postponing the hard truth sitting in your own bedroom. And that truth is usually brutal. You know exactly what to do. You just have not done it yet. Maybe you know the relationship is wrong. Maybe you know you should leave. Maybe you know you should set a boundary. Maybe you know you should stop texting the person who keeps making you feel small. Maybe you know you should sleep more, work less, speak up, or finally admit what you have been pretending not to see. But knowing is not the same as acting, especially when your own emotions are involved. And that is where the exhaustion comes in. People who give the best advice are usually highly empathic. They do not just hear people's problems, they absorb them. They can read a room the second they walk in. They can spot manipulation in somebody's tone. They can detect self-deception from a mile away. They know what it feels like to be hurt, ignored, or misunderstood. That is exactly why their advice is so accurate. But that same empathy becomes a burden when it turns inward. You carry everyone else's feelings, everyone else's crisis, everyone else's desperate need for healing. By the time you are finally alone at the end of the day, you are emotionally spent, empty, hollowed out. You have burned all your cognitive fuel being the strong one for everyone else. So when your own life desperately needs attention, there is almost nothing left in the tank. And that is when self-sabotage starts to make sense, not because you do not know better, but because you are exhausted from knowing better for everybody else. There is also something deeper happening underneath the surface. The fixer identity can become addictive. If your personal life is a mess, but you are still useful to everyone else, then your pain starts to feel productive. Your chaos feels justified. Your self-neglect starts to feel noble, like sacrifice. You tell yourself you are too busy helping others to help yourself. But sometimes the truth is much harder to swallow. You are terrified to turn the advice inward, because the second you do, there is nowhere left to hide. You cannot keep pretending the problem belongs to someone else. You cannot keep acting wise while ignoring the exact instructions you already gave your best friend. That is the moment a lot of people avoid for their entire lives, not because they are weak, but because they are afraid of what it means to finally hold themselves accountable. And yet, that is exactly where your breakthrough begins, because Solomon's paradox is not a life sentence. It is a clue that your intelligence is real, a clue that your empathy is real, a clue that your self-awareness is real. The issue is not that you cannot see the world clearly. The issue is that your own life carries too much emotional weight for your brain to stay detached. So the next evolution is not learning how to give better advice. You have already mastered that. The next evolution is learning how to step back from your own fear, how to look at your own story with the same honesty you give everyone else, how to speak to yourself with the same patience and grace that you give away so freely, how to stop treating your own pain like an exception to the rules. Because if you can see the truth in other people, you already have the tools to see it in yourself. And when you finally do, something shifts. You stop confusing loyalty with self-abandonment. You stop confusing being needed with being loved. You stop confusing chronic emotional exhaustion with strength. You realize your advice was never fake. You were just applying your genius in the hardest possible direction. So no, you are not a fraud. You are not a hypocrite. You are not secretly less intelligent than the people who come to you for help. You are a deeply perceptive person with a blind spot in the one place that matters most, your own life. And the day you finally turn that wisdom inward is the day everything starts to change. If this hit a little too close to home, it probably means you have spent years carrying everyone else's problems while ignoring your own. But why do people like you, who care so deeply, also disappear for days, weeks, or even months when life gets too loud? Click the next video on your screen to discover the psychology of ghost mode and why some people vanish the moment they need to survive themselves. I'll see you there.